I'm not teaching, I'm publicly learning, but hi and welcome to Learning for Life in UK test part 99. The slave trade part 3, why doing risk training, and if you participate in risk training, this is at your own risk. And this will be about slavery, and this is part 3, I think, and we were just talking, and I forgot the time. And I'm of course thankful that you watched the other part, and this is now the next time, about what happened. So in 1807, slavery became illegal. Trading slaves became illegal. And then in 1833, the Emancipation Act abolished slavery throughout the British Empire. And it also happened that the Royal Navy stopped slave ships from other countries and freed the slaves and punished the slave traders. After 1833, 2 million Indian and Chinese workers were employed to replace the free slaves. They worked on sugar plantations in the Caribbean, in mines in South Africa, on railways in East Africa, and in the army of Kenya. We are getting no explanation to working condition. We had something about the workers in Britain. Working conditions during the Industrial Revolution were very poor. There were no laws to protect employees, who were often forced to work long hours in dangerous situations. Children also worked and were treated in the same way as adults. Sometimes they were treated even harshly. And about the slaves we have, the living and working conditions for slaves were very bad. We're speaking now about the American and Caribbean slaves who are working in tobacco and sugar plantations. The living and working conditions for slaves were very bad. Traveling on British slave ships was terrible and horrible. And now we're just told that now Chinese and Indian workers worked on sugar plantations. And it then goes on with the American War of Independence. What do we do now? Do we think ourselves? If they don't tell us that they were bad, the working conditions as they did with the people working during the Industrial Revolutions and the slaves working on the Caribbean and American plantations, and now we're having good ones? Or what are we told here? After 1833, 2 million Indian and Chinese workers were employed. So they were not employed, they were no longer slaves. It also makes sense because the 1833 Emancipation Act for abolishment of slavery abolished slavery. They were no employees. But it would be really helpful if it would be one sentence to say if these were now at least appropriate working conditions, or if it was just a continuation, because oftentimes if someone talks about that, it means it just goes on, just under another name. So is that now we should think ourselves the same, just under another name? Is that we should think ourselves it's not told, so it's the opposite, it's not all perfect? Should we think realistically that it were sugar plantations, mines in South Africa, railways in East Africa, and army, so army, railway, sugar plantations, mines in the 19th century? Are these the most beautiful, or are these hard jobs? Should we think ourselves realistically? Or should we not think at all and just learn what they say us? We're doing both. We're learning what they say us. 2 million Indian and Chinese workers replaced the freed slaves. What were they doing now? Were they free shipped back to West Africa? And could they live there again happily? What happened to them? Had they got money for their mistreatment or something? This is not the end of the story, but this ends pretty openly. 2 million Indian and Chinese workers were employed to replace freed slaves. What were the freed slaves doing now? Who was taking care of them? Or were they? So the freed slaves, they worked on sugar plantations in the Caribbean, in mines in South Africa, on railways in East Africa, and in the army in Kenya. So now Indian and Chinese workers worked in railways in East Africa, army in Kenya, South Africa, and plantations in the Caribbean, sugar plantations. That is what we are told, and we're thinking with ourselves further, everyone for him or herself, but I would say way better conditions than slavery, but still hard conditions. Now let's do some wrist training. We're having always a good, comfortable and stable set, and we're bringing the arms up next to us, the hands front to fists, and then we're bringing these fists down and up. And again down. And up. This is the spotlight, and we're having 3 rules. The first rule is that we are stopping immediately as soon as we feel pain. And if you participate in this is also your safe. And now we're doing the second exercise, the flashlight. Same position, but now we're going with the fists to the insides and to the outsides. The second rule is that we're going only as far as we can go with a little bit of effort. And the third rule is that we're not overdoing it. As soon as we've reached enough to strengthen the arms, we're stopping. We don't want to exhaust the muscles of tense, just to strengthen them. Next exercise, the same setup, now flat hands, and we're going again to the insides and to the outsides, and that is the magician. And back, and then more split the last time. Now to the pancake flipper. Flat hands next to us, and we're turning these flat hands up and again down. And up and a bit of a pancake flipper. We should obviously think there are way too many missing links in the story for that we cannot think. They want us to remember the following: that in 1807 it became illegal to trade slaves in British ships or from British ports, and that in 1833 the Emancipation Act abolished slavery throughout the British Empire. But we will learn everything. For example, that the commercial expansion and prosperity was sustained in part by the booming slave trade. While slavery was illegal within Britain itself, by the 18th century it was a fully established overseas industry dominated by Britain and the American colonies. The living and working conditions for slaves were very bad. Many slaves tried to escape, and others revolted against their owners in protest at their terrible treatment. We will remember it all, but we will remember, of course, also that in 1807 it became illegal to trade slaves in British ships or from British ports, and in 1833 the Emancipation Act abolished slavery throughout the British Empire. And a little bit of a process do we have as well. Late 1700s, that is not a good date to speak of if it is used to try to memorize something. It causes so much confusion suddenly to talk of the late 1700s. At the end of the 18th century, that fits. So at the end of the 18th century, the first formal anti-slavery groups were set up by Quakers. And William Wilberforce, we will remember also that name, he was an evangelical Christian and a member of parliament, and he played an important part in changing the law, and because he succeeded with other abolitionists to turn the public opinion against the slave trade. In 1807, we want to these two numbers. In 1807, it became illegal to trade slaves in British ships or from British ports. In 1833, the Emancipation Act abolished slavery in the whole British Empire. And the Royal Navy also helped to stop slave ships from other countries and freed slaves and punished the slave traders. And they were then replaced by Indian and Chinese workers. And they were then working in sugar plantations, in mines, on railways, and in the army. let's do a bit more restraining. I think we're through with what they have written to the slave trade. So I think we will end with now with restraining, maybe a repetition, but we will end with restraining. And we're doing a triangular castle architect. Both hands are fists out, and we're bringing them to the inside. And we're bringing them up. And to the outside. And down. These seconds. And now we bring them the whole thing backwards down to the outside. Up. And to the inside. Then up a crab, anxious to a fever, the arm next to us, hand formed to a fist, and we bring this fist down, and we're pressing carefully with slight force against it. And the outside. And from the top. And a little bit from the bottom. And on the other side, bring the fist down and press on the outside. Now we're pulling from the outside. And from the bottom. And we're just fixing the extension digital muscle, beginning with moderate pressure over the middle part of the lower arm. And on the other side. And we're done with the restraining. A little correction here. Many of the slaves, of course, know something about it, did live with the families already since centuries in the American countries. Way longer than many immigrants coming from Ireland, Italy and Germany to America. So what we should have is 1807 illegal off-trade slaving in British ships or from British ports, and 1833 Emancipation Act abolished slavery throughout the empire. These are the two most important things which they have written here at the side. And we're having a little time, but not enough. I want to go over the battles. Maybe the battles are also all listed, but the battles will help us a lot to go over it again. Let's make the 6 wives of Henry VIII in the last 2 minutes. So we're having Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr. Catherine of Aragon had several children, but only Mary survived. And King Henry wanted to divorce her, but Pope wasn't giving him the allowance. He did it. He founded the Church of England and did it then. Anne Boleyn he had one child with Anne Boleyn, and her name Elizabeth. And she was unpopular, and she was accused of having lovers, and she was executed. Jane Seymour, his third wife, she had the child Edward, but she died short after the birth. And when we have Anne of Cleves, married for political reason and then divorced. Then we have Catherine Howard, the fifth wife, and she was also accused of having lovers and executed. And when we have Catherine Parr, she was a widow when she married Henry VIII. She lived longer than he, and she married again, but she died also then soon. And the 6 are divorced, killed, died, divorced, killed, survived. I think we're ending it, and until the next time. I thank you very much. Until next time.